Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 179. The topic is Identity-Centric to Proof-Centric Authorization Models. Our guests today are Alan Karp, distinguished architect, inventor of ZBAC, past guest on episode 110, and Rohit Khare, software architect, Authz Substack author, former Google product manager, GovOps advocate, and past guests on episodes 1973, 122, 148 and a half, 161, and 168. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Thank you.
So this is a last minute episode because we had a cancellation. So I invited two of my favorite authorization friends onto the live stream. We're going to talk about the topic today it might sound like token-based access control, but it's a different phrasing, proof-centric authorization models. And the origin of this topic was I had made a post about a new authorization pattern, which I call ARC plus an array of tokens, where we send action, resource, context, and then an array of tokens, or really a bunch of evidence or proof about why you should be able to perform that action. So I wanted to have an episode about this and sort of looping into why I think identity-centric authorization is really at a dead end. And the person who got me onto that thread was Alan. And so, Alan, if we could start with you, I wanted to, you told me a story at IAW maybe like 2 years ago, and I'm wondering if you could tell that story again about the origin of capability versus identity-based authorization.
Yeah. So today, all our computer systems, you authenticate, and then when you make a request, they look up based on your authentication if you're allowed to do it. And we just assume that that's the only way things can work. But in fact, if you go back to the late 60s and early 70s, there was actually a battle going on between this identity-centric approach and something called capabilities back then, not functionality, but just a particular form of you hold possession of something that gives you a particular permission on a particular resource. And in those days, there were hardware registers that held them, but it can be done in software, like software tokens. And the basic idea is that instead of proving who you are and then having the system look up, you have permission to do this, you simply present the proof directly. And my tagline here is the anti-identity guy. I've been going to the Internet Identity Workshop for 15, 16 years now, and that's often on my badge, because in a sense we use identity as a proxy for what we really want. So when I make a request of your service, you're going to ask me who I am, and what are you going to do with that identity? You're going to look up if I'm authorized. And that indirection from identity to authorization is the source of a lot of complexity and vulnerability. And so what if instead I would just present proof that what I was asking for was authorized? Things get a lot simpler. And we're now going back to 1970, where that's a viable option. And that's what we'll be discussing today, I guess.
One of my questions about this would be, what have the audiences made of these terms over the years, right? To say that, going beyond identity is an interesting statement to make today, literally 42, 43 issues of IAW when we're helping start this almost 20 years ago from our first meetings, or before that, even before identity was, Kerberos and granting tickets in the 1980s, we're now getting the old man, I'm afraid. How have audiences reacted differently to that history over that history? Right? I know I'm asking with a product management and marketing hat on, but the key is words mean what they're seen in the market to be. Do people see post-identity and think of different things now?
Yeah, there was a period in the early 80s. In the 70s, we made the decision to go with the the Unix-like permission system where you authenticate, which means that every program has all your permissions. And of course, that's the root cause of the virus problem, because if you get a virus in your spreadsheet, it can trash all your files, or these days encrypt all your files. And the other choice was that you would have what's called a C list, and when you submitted a request, you would point to one of those entries and it would designate the resource and have the permission that you wanted. And that meant you could start solitaire with very few permissions, and then it wouldn't be able to encrypt all your files. And so that was the status in the late 70s, early 80s, but the identity model won. There's a conspiracy theory about why it won. I don't want that on record, so I'm not going to tell you. But find me an IIW coming up the end of next month, and I'll tell you the story. And in the process, the capability approach got discredited as not workable. And so, but as we got more to distributed systems, cross-enterprise collaborations, we began to run into all the problems of an identity-centric approach. For example, federating identities is very difficult, very expensive. Look at Ping Identity's bottom line to see that. And I actually believe it's unnecessary. And if the difference is that identity-centric is based on what you can do, but very few people work alone. You work in collaboration. You work with other people. You work with other services. And so you want to be able to delegate to them a subset of what you're allowed to do. And the identity-centric approach simply doesn't support that.
Well, to briefly follow up, it's true that groups and collaborations become complicated. Cross-enterprise things add complication to it, but there is an intuitive charm to it. Some bit about realizing that not to sound too much again as old-time references here. I did ask you about history, and we're starting off here a bit consciously talking about history. But it's also the case that viruses aren't carried in spreadsheets anymore, and our top view application is no longer solitaire, right? We talk about more prompt injections and these subtler attacks, because we live in a world where people are used to mobile phones and containerization and things that were discredited as too hard to do. Now that we have trillions of times more compute power, we do routinely. Like fire up a complete copy of the operating system image for every time you run an app. Sure, every OpenClaw invocation will do that now. So that's one thing I will pass along keep in mind as we talk about this. That was the history. What should be revisited given the great profusion of resources and the much, much higher velocity of threats we face?
Well, in fact, the mobile operating systems got it half right, because every program you run on your mobile operating system doesn't have all your permissions. It just has the set of permissions that you need. But we're still talking about collaboration. So what if my stock trading app wants access to my stock monitoring app? How do you coordinate that? It's very awkward. It's very difficult. It's one-off. It's pop up a dialogue where the user has to click OK, and then you get click fatigue. It's all because we started from the wrong place. We started with identity, and we should have started with authorization. And if you start from authorization, everything gets simple. We've built tools that were easier to use because we added security, because we started from the proof-centric rather than the identity-centric approach. All kinds of things get easier if you do that.
I actually wanted to sort of build on what Rohit was saying, but with APIs and agents, it's not just the identity of the person, but there's a number of identities of pieces of software that also might factor into an authorization decision. So maybe I'm authorized to make a wire transfer, but only from the Chase mobile app, not from a third-party mobile app. And I think, to me, it seems like the AI has been a forcing function where we the identity-centric approach really falls down. And I shouldn't say identity-centric. I feel like I should really say the human identity-centric model is really falling down. But maybe you could comment on like maybe why now, and is why is agentic the forcing function that maybe we've been waiting for capabilities to show its strengths.
Well, Victor Liu had a great quote. It was, let me see if I get it right. Agents can enhance human agency, but they can't assume human responsibility. In fact, I plan to have a session either at IAW or the follow-on agent identity workshop, a prove me wrong session. Agent identity is useless because you don't have a trust relationship with the agent. You have a trust relationship with the principal the agent is acting with. You can't hold the agent responsible. It might only live for 20 seconds. You can't, auditing has limited utility because if you ask it to do the same thing twice, it'll do completely different things. So, this is so, and somebody else, now I've forgotten who said it, said that, I think it was Nicola Gallo, said that agent identity is not a new problem. It's exposing the problems we had all along. And I think that's why it's the forcing function.
Yeah.
Well, what I hear, and here to throw yet more academic spin on it, is Heidegger's distinction between present at hand and ready to hand, right? The agent, in this case, the piece of software, the problem that we are exposing here. And again, the term non-human identity, the topic of one of our most recent IOH episodes, is a topic I've made a note here to come back to, because that transfer money request Mike referred to that should only be accepted from the Chase mobile app. We snuffed that under the rug by calling that should be app identity or non-human identity. And already, we're kind of wrapped around the axle of terminology. But when we come back to your core point, Alan, which was that we can only trust the principle behind the agent and not the tool itself, I think that maybe we're there. Why is this difficult? And it's because of Heidegger's notion of a tool like an agent or like a word processor or anything else that's between me mediating the trust relationship and the banking software is something that merges together. So it's so easy to say my claw, an AI agent software or not. And when we think of it as positive, we make this illusion between identity and software identity that seems easier at the time and burns us later. Mm-hmm. And when we think of it as foreign or alien or under a separate set of control and is not part of my act, it is ready, it's not is present at hand but not ready to hand, then we are more aware of the risks of doing that. And we say, hey, just because this request came from a Chase mobile signed app still didn't mean it came from Mike Schwartz. Should we really go call him up and confirm this transfer? Well, is that a useful framework to think about this problem of what is, when we conflate the tools we use with the identity of the person wielding the tool, we do this a lot in real life.
Yeah, I want to come back to that example of the transfer only from the Chase app, because that exposes a fundamental flaw in thinking. Mm-hmm. If the Chase app wanted, and maybe this is a transfer to some, barred country or whatever, and I really want it done, and it won't, Chase app can't do it. But that's a bad example. Let me rephrase that. If the Chase app wanted to
Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank enters the chat and says, "Did you say prohibited country transfer?"
It was the third-party app that I was saying was blocked, not the Chase app.
Right. Yeah. So the third-party app that you don't want to do it, but Chase would like that third-party app to do some processing, to not just do the transfer, but do some other work that the Chase app doesn't do. Then the Chase app can simply proxy the request that came from the other app. Does whatever the other app says to do, just what the other app would do if you allowed it. And so you haven't really gained any protection, right? It's up to the Chase app to honor your policy, but let it delegate, and now at least you have a chain of responsibility. That Chase app asked FUBAR app to do the transfer, whereas if Chase proxies requests, you have no knowledge that FUBAR app was involved.
let me build on that and come back to the title of the episode and see if this doesn't kick off that discussion. Um, why, in sense of this made-up example, obviously no implications involved to any of the banks named here by example. Um, why do we presume so often as engineers that people would like to see flexible Lego block building mix and match systems? And often from a corporate perspective, there's just the I don't want the support burden and I would like to lock it down. Because as soon as we say chase wants, organizations don't necessarily want things too to get to a deeper philosophical level. It's another problem with GovOps and governance in general is trying to make tacit and make explicit all these generations of assumptions about how governance works, because AI is also forcing our hand. It's having to not just write an employee handbook for smart people, but try to write a handbook for particularly malicious, dumb, or underinformed agents. So in that Spain, in this example of you have a budgeting application that's putting out our plan for going out tonight, right? And it's planned our evening out and it wants to split the hotel bill or the restaurant bill. And because I have a Chase account or a Stripe or a PayPal or a Venmo, I want this AI agent to call into them, in which case it's a facade. It's a relay. The baton is passed. As far as Stripe or PayPal or the bank is concerned, it looks like an internal request, direct end-to-end. The other way of looking at those, why did the bank care, right? Obviously, standards and all take a long time, and we're not about to try and make this, magically solve a problem here. But is it that they want you to only use their mobile app because they don't want you shopping by bot? They don't want to be faceless. They don't want to be intermediated. And that's why they want the digital certificate that says there's an end-to-end proof that it's the binary running on a trusted attestation from a lockdown, non-rooted phone, or is there a, where's the proof and who wants it?
No, I think that's looking at the problem inside out.
Okay.
It's Chase that wants to use the third-party service to do the transfer. It may, charge less or get a lower fee for the transfer from the receiving side. I don't know. But when I ask a service to do something on my behalf, by encapsulation, I should not know how they do the task. Whether they do it internally in a single program, whether it's 500 microservices in their environment, whether they outsource it to a subcontractor, that's not my business. And when you block that, you are trying to impose control that is an illusion. And it's illusion because of proxying requests, and it's an illusion because of shared credentials. And so there's a precept, which is don't prohibit what you can't prevent.
Let me reground this slightly, and I'll pass it back to Mike. I know that the banking one gets in a lot of history and a lot of other examples, Alice and Bob.
Yeah.
But 2 days ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals intervened and put on hold an order in the Perplexity versus Amazon case. So to bring this example fully up to the moment, instead of the days of viruses and 1, 2, 3 macros on them, Perplexity has an AI agent and a browser, and they would like to shop for you on Amazon.com. And Amazon.com is quite pointedly saying, no, we don't want to. Part of it is relying on Supreme Court precedent on like the LinkedIn scraping cases from the early 2000s. But in this case, Court A said in the first jurisdiction, yep, Amazon can tell people to butt out, so they can ban Perplexity if they can detect it. Now they've put on hold there. And so I will not be the legal analyst that says, hey, what should happen or what shouldn't happen. But this is the heart of the issue about whether, in this case, currently, as of yesterday, Perplexity AI's shopping agent can access Amazon to shop on your behalf, but there's exactly this tension between what organizations want isn't clear. But in any case, what can we as technologists provide as tooling to get to a better consistent answer here so that either way is supported, whatever the users in the organization want? Because clearly this war of bot versus bot detection and bot defense is like spy versus spy. How can identity and proof help here?
It can't. This is just impossible. And by trying, you make things harder to use and less secure. In the Perplexity case, all I need to do is run Puppeteer on the Amazon page and let the Comet browser tell it what to do. As far as Amazon's concerned, it's me. So they're asking for the impossible.
Comet being Perplexity's browser, by the way.
Comet being Perplexity's browser.
Right.
Yeah. By the way, I don't trust it. And so on my machine, I run Perplexity using sudo in a guest account. It does not have all my permissions.
It's a problem with basically. It's impersonating you.
That's
and so it's a problem with sharing credentials.
Well, on my machine, it's impersonating Fred.
I actually wanted to pivot into a slightly different area. So one of the strategies that we can have is advise versus actually control. So, um, so going back to my Murderbot example, um, Murderbot actually has free will. The governor module advises it that this is against policy, and it can actually perform the action and get punished, but it still has free will to actually perform the action. But the idea that if you build these systems too securely, you can't actually get business done. And so, what's the trade-off between um, actually building authorization systems that enforce versus building authorization systems that maybe just advise?
Well, the most common example um, on any system that allows delegation is everybody wants to implement do not delegate. In other words, you'll delegate to me and I can't delegate to anybody else. And so let's say you give me read and update permission on your database. And I want to run a program to query your database. Now, if I can't delegate it only query permission. So I have to give it query and update permission. And now we're less secure because you wouldn't try to impose some restriction on me. It's a standard thing. So you have some policy. You can tell me, please obey this policy, but we may both be worse off if I don't violate it in some circumstances. So the governance issue is one. On this task force I'm on, we've just produced a document on governance for AI agent systems. It's quite good. We're trying to get permission to release it. But it covers issues of policy, communicating policy. So business partners, for example, you may tell me, please don't delegate this permission to your contractors. But it's please, because you can't enforce it.
This is the Decentralized Identity Foundation, or DIF, working group.
Yeah, Trusted AI Agent Working Group.
So people can look for output of that, and hopefully check.
Right.
And if it comes out, we'll link it in the episode notes.
Okay, and it covers a lot of things that neither identity-centric nor proof-centric systems commonly consider.
I'm going to push back a little on your governance definition, because I think you could look at governance from two angles. From the user who's delegating permission to some agent to act on its behalf. But when I think of governance, I'm thinking more about the enterprise who's trying to figure out, have I done a good job mitigating all the risks? So I'm wondering, when you're thinking about capability versus identity-based authorization, what's the impact for the enterprise to move from the well-known identity-based strategy, where we review we inventory the people, we inventory the entitlements, and we then do an access certification campaign to verify the mapping between people and entitlements? What's the implication for enterprises in governance if they move to this new capability model?
Everything gets easier. Look, we federate identities. When our companies sign a contract, my company signs a contract to use your service. You're going to put my identity in your database so you can have a place to put the things I'm allowed to do, right? That's what identity federation is all about. That's difficult to do. I have a slide that shows the 37 steps you have to do to bring on one business partner and federate identities. Whereas if we sign the contract and you give my company a capability that lists all the things anybody can do in my company can do under the contract, then my company can delegate to a manager in my department who can delegate to me. And then when I present a request, you can verify that it's authorized. And if I'm trying to do something bad, you'll have an identifier in there that you can tell my company that identifier so my company can track me down. One of the fallacies is we're using our intuition in the physical world about identity. In fact, Alan Karp could be a pseudonym that my company made up so that you would think there was only one idiot working for the company. And they just assign that identifier to every idiot they send out into the world. You have no way of knowing. You didn't vet the identity. Whatever the tag is in there, you will have no recourse but to tell my company, whoever has that tag did this bad thing. And trying to think that that identifier in your database is meaningful in terms of knowing who to throw in jail is a mistake. And it leads to lots of complications that are unnecessary.
I mean, it's one more clue. You're kind of describing, again, an old person reference here, the Thomas Crown affair, right? Where, your superpower isn't Alan Karp, the one, malicious or uninformed user or difficult user who's like going to be, systems are hard to make foolproof because fools are so ingenious. But could represent a whole gang of superpowered idiots, as you were saying, right? This question is, what is the purpose of that string, that key, that identification, that proof? It is to maybe not blame a person, but is ultimately a step in the chain of accountability.
Yes.
And accountability is the core question Mike started with, which is that do you do it in advance or do it at the end, right? That a French legal system in which everything that is not permitted is prohibited can be safe in one way and precautionary, and an Anglo-Saxon one in which essentially case law has to be built up and we never find out exactly what is allowed except what is prohibited. The opposite way of going about it, they both lead different places. But in the area of audit and governance, fundamentally is a safer starting place, especially with these non-deterministic agents, starting from a premise that these things are dangerous and have to be contained, and only that which can be permitted, and then later on, to kind of in advance prevent harm. Or do we take this technology and the approaches that we've been talking about technology and saying, it's enough to say we want to let 1,000 flowers bloom, and I just need to know who to hand the next top of responsibility onward to. And if the Alan Karp that signed the collaboration deal and has one account installed in their other parties' systems, and it, by the way, needs to travel as a vector, we'll come back to the principal actor resource context becoming something more ethereal now, right? Is principal a chain? Is it a vector? Is it a set? Is it a bag? Is it truly anonymous? There's no principal. This thing comes up. So is the goal, I think, is the way we think about it, the way you think about this problem is what I'm curious about, that the role of software technology here is to help you audit and find things and trace back and punish after the fact? Or is it to really be sure and be safe by design and prevent things from happening that shouldn't happen?
Yeah, Mark Miller wrote a wonderful paper called Horton. It's how you use object capabilities, basically object references as capabilities, and still do responsibility tracking. Mm-hmm. And it's both, so you do prevent, but you do patrol. And he's got the abstract of the paper is like a Dr. Seuss poem. But the point is that when you delegate, you are responsible for that person's actions. So if I delegate to you and you delegate to Mike and Mike does something bad, I'm going to hold you, Rohit, responsible. And it's up to Rohit to hold Mike responsible. I like to think of it as a chain collision car accident. You sue the guy behind you, who sues the guy behind him, and who sues me because but maybe it was my son behind me and I don't want him to get in trouble, so I assume responsibility, right? That's the best you can do, and it has important privacy implications. If you assume that all the identities are globally known, then you're giving up a lot of privacy information as to who you trusted to do this for you. In fact, the U.S. Navy was very happy with the fact that these identifiers could be, opaque identifiers that are known only to the delegator.
What type of, so let's say hypothetically, so you say if we move to capabilities-based access control, it'll be simpler for organizations. And I'm wondering, what type of systems do you think enterprises will need to build in order to build this new, I want to say capability, but then I'm using the capability.
Functionality.
Yeah. So how do companies actually make it real? Like, what type of new infrastructure do they need to build this functionality?
Yeah, they don't need much. The main difference is you can keep your access control list, you can keep your role-based access control, But instead of using it the time when a request comes in, use it at authentication time. So I log into the system. The system sees what role I am, and it gives me a bunch of tokens, capabilities. And that shows up on a UI as a list of things that I can click on. And when I click on one of them, that invokes an operation on that object. And the fact that I possess the capability is proof that I'm authorized. And so it's a change. It's not a trivial change, but you don't have to give up all your existing infrastructure to get there.
I'm guilty of having done a little bit of offline research here, and I feel like I should read this into the record, like as though it's a congressional debate. I think this must have been from around 2007 or 2008 from context. But Mark Miller, James Donnelly from Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and Alan Karp, back when Mark was at Google and Alan was at HP, delegating responsibility in digital systems. Horton's who done it. Horton here's a who, not quite. And anyway, Mike, it goes like this. Programs do good things, but also do bad, making software security more than a fad. The authority of programs we do need to tame, but bad things will happen. Who do we blame? From the very beginnings of access control, should we be safe by construction or should we patrol? Horton shows how, in an elegant way, we can simply do both and so save the day. The idea of proactive control and reactive control are both essential. But put fairly well by this old work by Mark.
That's Alan. The best abstract of a technical paper I've ever read. And he did credit Dr. Seuss. He said with apologies to Dr. Seuss.
It does. That was the next line. And so this is the one that introduces the solitary example. What was the reaction to that paper? Since we're taking back down memory lane here a bit.
Fell into a black hole. Part was timing. It was very early in capabilities at a time when they were largely
the term OCAP, object capability.
Capabilities. This is capability as object reference model, and that can be extended over the network. So it's quite general, but the timing was too early in the process. People are now finding all the difficulties that an identity-centric approach has, and they're at least willing to listen to alternatives.
But to speak as devil's advocate, having introduced this paper, it's also the time and era in which we talked about capabilities as being like bearer tokens. So the ability to have a memory address in an old-style computer systems architecture class essentially means if you know where it is, then you can poke at it and change it, and that gives you the right to do so. We put in memory mapping and memory protection. But if ultimately devil's advocate seems to scare people is that if the ability to move money out of Mike's bank account at Chase to my bank account at Chase is just the ability to write to a certain location in memory or in a certain table in SQL, even if that piece of long digit string is cryptographically verified and signed, and if it was so used and abused for, we would have an ironclad chain of blame back to the criminal who did it. It still seems to spook people as saying, I'd rather just have a request that's coming in as an RPC that says, should Bob transfer money from Mark to Rohit, and then I'll keep that log. I just really don't want to have a bearer string that could somehow be dumped on a paper tape and shipped by carrier pigeon.
That's right. And there are alternatives. So there are certificate capabilities like ZBack and UCAN are two certificate capabilities. We had an implementation that we called Zebra Copy, after a local store that went out of business, but that demonstrated how capabilities work. And we actually showed that a standard delegation flow across companies was considerably simpler than doing it with identity-based systems. That was the bottom line of that paper.
I pass the baton back to Mike, but I will do that thing about we do on the internet. Like, wait, let's talk about our audience, such as it is. I hope there's a few people listening in live and a few more later on. Let's rewind and explain ZBack, and then
So ZBack, there was a time when capabilities were discredited, and if you mentioned that word in a room of security experts, they would immediately label you a fool. And so I had to come up with something else. And we talk about authentication, authn, and we talk about authorization, authz. So instead of role-based access control, or authentication-based access control, I came up with the term authorization-based access control, ZBAC. And we actually published a paper in the Journal of Information Warfare, of all places, called ABAC to ZBAC, the Evolution of Access Control Models. And that's actually gotten a lot more traction than I thought it would. A lot of people have been citing that paper as their introduction to capabilities. But yes, it was just that I introduced the term to solve a political problem.
I'm actually going to add a link to that paper in the episode notes.
Yeah, use the one from the tech reports. The Journal of Information Warfare is gone. So
I just
researchgate.net. I see a link.
Actually, it's available at jinfowar.com still.
Oh, well, whatever the link is dead. And I actually, if you'll notice, the URL is not hp.com, it's shift left, because HP got rid of their links to the tech report repository. But,
so I actually I'm curious to get your feedback. I have my own definition of capability. So there's been sort of a movement in authorization systems towards PARC, principal, action, resource, context. And in Authz, the OpenID standard that standardized an authorization request, they call it subject instead of principal, but it's pretty much the same idea. So I think there's some consensus in PARC format. And so it's helpful to put capabilities-based access control into that sort of pattern. And the way that I've been doing it is I've been saying a capability is a compound primary key of action plus resource. So drive is not I can't do access control on drive, and I can't do access control on car, but drive car together, the action plus the resource together, that's actually a capability.
well,
I'm curious if you agree with that or have criticisms of that.
but it's not quite. I don't think it's quite right. To me, a capability is an unforgeable, transferable permission to use the thing it delegates. So the important part about a capability is it combines designation with authorization. It's got to be unforgeable, otherwise people can just make it up. And it's only useful if it's transferable. And so the standard model of that is your car key. When you leave your car for service, you don't enter the technician's name in the access control list of your car, right? You just give them the key. So that's an example of a capability. It's unforgeable, transferable, designates, and it gives permission. So now the way all
one of the important things I just want to interrupt, the human intuition for this is that it's not so dangerous because a physical car key, we make the assumption that it's hard and expensive to copy. So while it's a bearer access mechanism,
that's right.
It's an expensive one to replicate.
And that's why
digital, I think, or radio frequency, we've seen it get copied.
Right, and that's why certificate capabilities, where you require a signature with a secret key, seem to get less resistance than bearer tokens.
I wonder if that is perhaps tied to implementation, because there could be multiple ways that you might convey a capability, whether a token or a $300 car key. Those car keys are ridiculous. But I'm wondering if your definition does it include the action resource, and then are you actually conflating the mechanism through which we might transfer this authorization with the core sort of definition of what the capability is?
No, remember I said it is a permission, which is action, on this resource, right? On the thing it designates. So that is the resource. So it is an action resource representation of action resource. The principal is not part of it except for responsibility tracking.
Sure.
That's where the principle, and that I think is the mistake that I see with the implementations, not the structure, but the implementations of Authz and Cedar, is the way they're using it leads to something called a confused deputy vulnerability. When I make a request under these systems, I don't specify what permissions I'm using. I specify what I want to do. And they look up in the environment to see if any combinations of things gives me that permission. In other words, my permissions are ambient in the environment. They're not part of the request. And that is the essential cause of the confused deputy vulnerability.
However, in both Cedar and Authz, the principal is optional. So you don't need, you may send a principal.
That's right. And I said the way people are implementing, the way they're using it is making that mistake. It's not inherent in the design.
Mm-hmm. Rohit, last question before we give poor Alan a break.
Well, I think one of the things about Proof today is I was blown away about a week ago when the New York Times ran a piece by Cade Metz about some very well-funded new startups, Harmonic Fun and Axiom and Computing and so on, about proving programs and correctness about it, and seeing, at least virtually speaking, that says lean theorem prover in print, right? That they're even beginning to talk about satisfiability and computer science challenges of that nature. I certainly don't know that I'm more inspired or horrified to see that the terms theorem proving and formal methods and billion-dollar dollar amounts in the same article, or to see an article like that by in a major newspaper. But when we talk about moving from identity-centric to proof-centric, proof brings with it a lot of baggage, or at least maybe sometimes a good connotation, because high-proof bourbon is a good time. When you choose to use that term with certain audiences, academic and otherwise, what do you think you hope to convey by the word proof? And so if we have a legalistic mindset to it, or other kinds of mindsets to it, is that helps or hinders people's belief, kind of their love and fear of math too?
Well, if I say, when I make a request, I send along proof that this request has been authorized, I get no pushback from that. So I don't think proof, and the proof could be simply possession of some opaque token. Proof can be that it's properly signed. Proof can be that the delegation chain is properly structured. But the use of proof itself doesn't seem to be a barrier.
It's not affected or maybe even improved by the hundreds of billions of dollars of hype around proof of work blockchain, right?
Well,
And enterprise technology can bring a pretty high bar, like, just getting a system to work as a system of record is hard enough, but proof that's forensic, might bring a whole bunch of other controls like FIPS, PCI DSS, and so on.
Yeah. I haven't run into that as a problem. Just, I'm proving to you that I've been authorized to make this request, and people don't conflate it with proof of correctness of programs or anything like that. So.
Great.
Okay. I messed the transition to last thoughts here. But Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to give you a chance if you want to. So if you would like to summarize it differently or promote anything you're doing, just give you a chance for last thoughts.
Yeah, I think that AI agents are really bringing all the problems we've seen with our identity-centric approach to the fore, and we're really going to. It's going to force us to rethink the way we do things. And by the way, I haven't decided which one of you is the good cop and which one of you is the bad cop. So let me know.
Well, then we're doing a good job at patrol, right? Neither good nor bad cops. We're just around to make sure things look nice. What I take out of this is a continuing reminder in the education of talking about people and computers together is a fraught business. The amount of anthropomorphization we do with AI, I think in net, I sound a little academic here. I say it's hindered people's understanding of what AI is more than it's helped to center around things like agents with soul documents and so on. But in the context of the title of this talk today, what it reminds us of is that identity of people is how we, in our human brains, trust people and have ideas about organizations and preconceptions and a bunch of of mental models. And we want to work in that direction as much as possible. But the computer doesn't have to do that, and it doesn't really natively do that. And it really is better off thinking about using tokens and proof. And so I think this is a transition that we should all support, but always realize that we have to work with the grain of how people think. And so you'll want to say, my agent should represent me, and go talk to that charity or talk to that restaurant and find out if they have a vegan option. But my agent should never impersonate me and then go try to spend my money or make a reservation with a deposit or something. These distinctions are why we need to have the infrastructure clean, so that we can support what end users want to express at the end of the day. And that's the real goal of governance, is to do what people want, as hard as that is.
And apropos of this conversation, the next topic is, when AI agents take the lead, who do they become?
What?
So we will, it seems like every other episode these days is about AI agent and delegation. So we'll continue that trend next time. I think that is it. We're at 45 minutes exactly. So with that, I will say thank you so much, Alan, for joining us again. Thank you, Rohit, for helping to co-host this one. Thank you, audience, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, and hope to even see some of you at IIW, where we'll hopefully all be there in person.
Yeah, and if you have questions, I'll be at IIW, and you can't shut me up about this stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.